know a lot of the crimson encounter. The air in the subterranean crawlspace tasted of wet slate and stagnant time. Rachel's flashlight beam cut a jagged, yellow scar through the suffocating darkness, illuminating patches of weeping stone that glistened like open sores. Behind her, Sarah's breathing was a rhythmic, frantic hitch, the sound of someone who had stopped trusting the ground beneath her feet 3 hours ago. "Look at the masonry," Rachel whispered, her voice too bright, too hungry for discovery. She ran a gloved hand over a section of the wall where the granite had been chiseled into repeating patterns of weeping eyes. "This isn't Victorian, Sarah. It's older. This foundation predates the island's settlement by centuries." "Rachel, please," Sarah hissed, clutching the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned the color of bone. "We've seen enough." The journal was clear. This place is a tomb. We don't belong down here. The air, it feels heavy, like it's waiting for us to stop moving. Rachel ignored her, pushing deeper into the narrow corridor. Her curiosity was a physical itch, a compulsion that blinded her to the oppressive silence of the tunnel. We're already this far. If there's an archive, if there's proof of what happened to the vanishings, it's down here. Just a few more meters. The corridor opened abruptly into a cavernous, circular chamber, its ceiling lost to the gloom. The temperature plummeted, and the scent changed. It wasn't just mold and damp stone anymore. It was the sharp, metallic tang of iron, fresh and copper-thick. Rachel's flashlight swept the room, dancing over heavy iron rings embedded in the floor and a raised stone dais at the center. She took a step forward, her boot crunching on something brittle. She didn't look down. She was focused on the shadows shifting at the periphery of the light. "Do you hear that?" Sarah's voice was a barely audible tremor. It wasn't a sound of wind or water. It was a wet, rhythmic slithering, like raw muscle dragging across jagged rock. Rachel froze. She swung the beam back toward the shadows. The light caught a flash of hair, a messy, familiar mop of crimson, matted with dark, dried crusts. "Mark?" Rachel's voice lacked its usual bravado, dropping to a breathless, confused whisper. "Mark, is that you?" "How?" The figure detached itself from the gloom. It moved with an unnatural, fluid velocity that defied the laws of physics. It didn't walk, it surged, a blur of tattered clothes and pale, predatory anatomy. "Rachel, run!" Sarah screamed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling with terrifying clarity. Rachel didn't react in time. The creature, a twisted mockery of the boy they had grown up with, slammed into her with the force of a falling timber. The flashlight clattered to the floor, rolling to a stop against the dais, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like limbs in the dark. Rachel's shriek was cut short by a wet, guttural sound. Mark, or what was left of him, had pinned her against the stone wall. His face was a mask of pale, translucent skin stretched tight over a skull that seemed to have sharpened into a blade. His eyes, once warm and familiar, were now 2 pinpricks of bottomless, ink-black void. "Mark, don't," Rachel gasped, her hands trembling as she tried to shove at his chest, but his frame was like cold, immovable granite. He didn't speak. He tilted his head, a bird-like movement, and then his jaw unhinged with a sickening, audible pop. There was no hesitation, no recognition. There was only the hunger, the ancient, unrelenting drive that David's manner demanded of its subjects. He drove his teeth into the soft hollow of her throat. The sound of tearing fabric and the wet spray of blood filled the chamber. Rachel's body arched, her fingers digging into the back of his coat, her initial struggle turning into a frantic, shuddering spasm. The light from the fallen flashlight flickered, casting strobe-like pulses over the horror, the bloom of red on her light-colored sweater, the way the light drained from her eyes even as her pulse hammered erratically against his teeth. Sarah stood paralyzed, the breath locked in her lungs. The world had tilted on its axis, dissolving into a nightmare of sound and color. The sight of Mark, the boy who had taught her how to ride a bike, the boy who had once shared a tent with them on the beach, now feeding like a feral animal on her best friend, shattered her sense of reality. "Rachel!" The name didn't sound like her own voice. It was a raw, primal sound of total grief. Mark didn't look up. He was vibrating with the intake, a low, guttural purr emanating from his chest. Rachel's hand, reaching out towards Sarah, hit the floor with a dead, heavy thud. Her eyes glazed over, the life leaking out of her in a steady, rhythmic cadence that matched the slow, deliberate pulse of the manor itself. Panic, cold and sharp as a razor, finally sliced through Sarah's paralysis. It wasn't logic that moved her, it was the sheer, terrifying instinct of the prey. She didn't scream again. She turned, her boots scrambling on the slick, uneven floor, and sprinted back the way they had come. She didn't know where she was running, only that she had to put distance between herself and the sound of that wet, rhythmic feeding. The tunnels were a labyrinthine nightmare, twisting and narrowing, leading her deeper into the dark. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a bird trapped in a box. Every shadow seemed to reach for her, every drip of water sounded like a footstep pursuing her. She burst into a smaller, secondary chamber, the air slightly fresher here, smelling of old paper and dust. She collapsed against a heavy wooden door that led to a narrow, forgotten alcove. She pressed her back against the wood, her lungs burning, her vision swimming with black spots. She fumbled for her phone. Her hands were shaking so violently that she nearly dropped it twice. The screen glowed in the pitch black, illuminating her tear-streaked face. No service. No, 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 she whimpered, pacing the 5-foot radius of the alcove. She held the phone up, weaving her arm through the air, desperate for a bar, a signal, anything. The silence of the room was oppressive. It felt as if the manor were watching her, weighing her worth, deciding when the hunt would begin. She remembered the journal, the talk of the broadcast. A sick, hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat. She was an actor in a play she didn't understand, and the stage was closing in. She moved to the far corner, where the masonry seemed to hold a sliver of exterior light. One bar. The flicker of hope was blinding. She dialed Matt's number, her thumb trembling over the screen. Ring. 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 Sarah? Matt's voice was distorted, crackling through the receiver, but it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Matt, she breathed, her voice cracking. Matt, you have to get here. You have to come now. Sarah, slow down. We're on the boat, we're almost at the dock. What's going on? Is Rachel with you? Rachel. The memory hit her again, the blood, the way Mark looked at her, the way the light died. A sob escaped her, ragged and uncontrollable. She's gone, Matt. They took her. It's not a legend. It's real. It's all real. Sarah, listen to me, Matt's voice grew firm, the protective authority of the leader surfacing. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move. We're coming. We're almost there. You don't understand, she whispered, looking into the darkness that seemed to be encroaching even here, pressing against the corners of the room. The walls, they're listening. He's watching us. He's broadcasting it, Matt. Everything. We're coming, he repeated, his voice resolute. Stay hidden. Don't make a sound. The line went dead, the silence returning with a sudden, violent intensity. Sarah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold stone, her knees drawn up to her chest, her phone clutched to her heart like a talisman. She stared into the dark, her pragmatism shattered, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. If the manor wanted a show, she would give it one. But she wouldn't go down without a fight. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of Rachel's hand hitting the floor, but the shadows in the room seemed to shift, coalescing into shapes that mirrored the ones she had seen on the walls. She wasn't alone. She never had been. She was just another pawn in the dark, waiting for the curtain to rise. The sound of the struggle, the wet, tearing rip of fabric and the sickening rhythmic glug of life leaving a body, echoed against the stone walls of the chamber. Sarah stood frozen, her flashlight beam dancing wildly over the scene. Mark's head was buried in the crook of Rachel's neck, his shoulders heaving with a rhythmic, gluttonous motion. Rachel's fingers, which had been clutching the leather-bound journal only moments ago, were now splayed against the cold, damp floorboards. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared back at Sarah. There was no pain in that look, only a terrifying, vacant shock. Run. The command didn't come from Sarah's brain. It was a primal instinct surging from the marrow of her bones. She took a step back, the toe of her sneaker scraping against a protruding nail. The sound was infinitesimal, yet it cut through the room like a gunshot. Mark stopped drinking. His head snapped up, a string of crimson saliva connecting his mouth to Rachel's throat. He didn't look like the boy they used to ride bikes with. His face was a map of collapsed anatomy, his jaw unhinged, his eyes swirling with a milky, bioluminescent rot. He didn't growl. He hissed, a sound of air escaping a pressurized coffin. Sarah didn't think, she bolted. She scrambled into the narrow service corridor, the flashlight clattering to the ground. She didn't turn back for it. She plunged into the pitch-black labyrinth, the stale air of the tunnels tasting of copper and dust. Behind her, heavy, wet thuds echoed against the stone. Mark was hunting, his speed unnerving, his movements lacking the clumsy hesitation of a human. Sarah's breath came in ragged, jagged bursts. She bumped into walls, tearing the skin of her shoulders, her hands clawing at the rough brickwork to pull herself forward. Every instinct told her to stop, to fold into herself and wait for the end, but the memory of Rachel's vacant eyes pushed her feet harder. She turned a corner, her hip slamming into an iron-wrought gate that rattled in its frame. She shoved it aside, her momentum carrying her into a small, windowless alcove that felt tighter, colder than the rest. She skidded into a corner, pressing her back against the wet stone, sliding down until her knees hit her chest. She pressed her palms over her mouth, muffling the sob that threatened to shatter her composure. Think. Be pragmatic. Be the anchor. Her hands shook violently as she reached into her pocket. Her phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of glass obscuring the interface, but the signal bar flickered, a single, lonely line of service amidst the manor's dead zones. She dialed. Her fingers fumbled over the buttons, hitting the speed dial for Matt. Ring. Sarah? Matt's voice was distorted, thin, layered with the static of the storm outside. Where the hell are you guys? We've been driving in circles for an hour. The GPS keeps looping us back to the docks. Matt, Sarah hissed, her voice a fragile red snapping in a hurricane. Matt, listen to me. Don't come to the front door. Don't go anywhere near the main hall. Sarah? You sound, what is going on? Is Rachel okay? She looked toward the mouth of the tunnel. The shadows seemed to be stretching, creeping along the walls like black ink on wet paper. There was a faint sound now, a rhythmic scraping of claws against stone, getting closer. Rachel is, she's gone, Met, Sarah whispered, a tear carving a hot track through the dust on her cheek. I'm in the basement. It's not a house. It's a slaughterhouse. Mark, he's here. He's changed. Everything is wrong. Sarah, stay exactly where you are. Matt's voice dropped into that tone he used when he was about to do something reckless. Emily's looking at the maps. We're close. I can see the outline of the manor through the fog. If you're in the basement, find a way to lock yourself in. We're coming. You don't understand, she sobbed, the sound choked and frantic. He's not alone. There's something else here. Someone watching. I can feel him, Matt. I can feel him looking at us. Who? Sarah, talk to me. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling of the corridor. It wasn't a physical creature, but a smudge of deeper darkness that coalesced into a humanoid shape. It didn't have a face, only the suggestion of a grin, and it stood directly between Sarah and the exit. Sarah clamped her hand over her mouth, her eyes fixed on the entity. It felt cold, a vacuum that sucked the heat right out of her skin. "Matt," she breathed into the phone, her voice barely a tremor. "Don't come for us. Get the others and leave. Just burn this place down. Please. Sarah? Sarah, answer me." The shadow shifted, its elongated fingers twitching. It wasn't attacking, it was waiting. It was performing for an audience she couldn't see. Sarah let the phone slip from her numb fingers. It clattered to the stone floor, the call still connected, the open line broadcasting the sound of her jagged, hitching breaths into the void. She reached out with her trembling hand, searching for a weapon, but found only cold, unforgiving stone. The entity tilted its head. From the darkness of the tunnels, a voice, hollow, resonant, and dripping with a sadistic, theatrical charm, echoed through the chamber. "Such a compelling opening act," the voice purred. "But the show, my dear, has only just begun." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, but the darkness behind her lids was no longer a sanctuary. It was a mirror of the shadow standing before her, a reflection of the abyss she was falling into. She realized then that there would be no rescue. There was only the stage, the script, and the hunger that was rapidly rising to meet her.